I could make a list for her.
I don't understand. The sun causes cancer.
Nature will kill you really quickly.
Maybe she felt empowered to comment on the environment after being an Iron Man. I don't know. Sometimes I think she's trolling us because really, like, nobody real is steaming their vagina, you know? Like.
I have always loved science. When I was little and everybody else wanted to be like a fireman, I wanted to be a paleontologist. My mom has all these stories of me bringing home like chicken bones that I found in the dirt, things like that. I've always loved that, exploring the world and learning about how things work.
I didn't really love science as a kid. Like in school, I was really into math, but I was never like, I'm gonna be a scientist. My love of science started when I took AP biology, and we did this experiment where we took bacteria and we added DNA and we made them resistant to antibiotics, which is a tool that we use in the lab all the time now. And I was like, whoa, science is so cool.
When I was in high school, Jurassic Park came out, and I loved Jurassic Park. The scientists in there were doing awesome things, and I started wondering, was any of that possible? So I never actually became a genetic engineer. I became a molecular biologist, but those were the things that led me down that path.
I didn't have any interest in science until probably a couple years ago, just, getting involved in the skeptical movement as a parent. But I was not like doing science experiments in my garage or anything like that.
My dad and I and my sister used to have conversations just about the universe and life and exploring the world around us in a critical way, but also enjoying the beauty and the amazement of all of it.
Scientists are not portrayed well on TV shows and movies. We're real normal people. So I wrote this whole article about all the things about me that are normal. Like I play tennis, I have 2 cats, I like to cook, I like to do arts and crafts, I have 2 kids. I just happen to, for my job, do science.
Gosh, what's our origin story?
A group of celebrities filmed a video.
And Layla and I are both huge Buffy fans. Huge Buffy fans. So when we saw that Sarah Michelle Gellar had spoken out against GMOs, one of us said that we were slain.
And she said, "You guys, Buffy, this is tragic. We can't have this." People perceive scientists as being these very serious people, maybe off working in their labs. But I mean, scientists love Buffy too,
We have a culture that idolizes celebrities, even outside of the areas in which they are celebrities for.
The voices of moms who inform their decisions with fear and hype rather than evidence, those voices are so loud.
But they're the only people talking about it. And if they're the only people talking about it, they're the only resource that people have. Being a parent is scary. I fell victim to it too. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was a fear-based mom. Everything was organic, everything was BPA free. And I was just so worried that everything that I was going to do was going to set my daughter up for failure.
I mean, I've completely been the irrational parent. I just flew with my kid and I went in, wiped everything down, but still it's hard to think rationally when you're dealing with something that's life-threatening. So I'm sitting there trying to turn on my rational brain and going, okay, I've wiped everything down. The chance of there being, a nut particle on the seat is very low, but still I'm looking around like, someone opening a pack of peanuts 3 rows from here? Because as a parent, you see your kid and you want to protect them, and so it's normal to freak out.
It's a very effective marketing ploy to scare parents, because if you can scare a parent, then of course they're going to shell out extra for the alternative.
Moms are a big, high-spending demographic because people are willing to spend money on their kids. And I feel like a lot of people I meet, actually, they're not, so anti-GMO. They haven't had time to research it because they're busy and they're not that interested in it. So they just figure like, oh, I guess I'll just pick the organic option because I have some vague sense that maybe that's better for my kids.
We wanted to provide a voice for moms that is based in science and evidence, because we get those fears. We understand where people are coming from.
We're also moms. It's not as if our concerns are any less legitimate.
And so I said, you know what should we do about this? And I forget which one of us or all of us sort of decided, yeah, we're gonna write a letter and we're gonna do it on Grounded Parents.
Thus was born Moms for GMOs.
Celebrities are beautiful and we like to look at them and we like to watch their movies, but we should be taking what they say with a grain of salt, if not several spoonsful of salt. Vani Hari is famous for the statement, and I'm paraphrasing here, there's no safe amount of chemicals to ingest, ever. The fact is, everything is made out of chemicals, and chemicals are everything.
I think that when people think about chemicals, they're not thinking about water or all of the lovely molecules that make up a piece of fruit.
If you break down the components in it, there are scary sounding long chemical names. Pears naturally synthesize formaldehyde because it's essential for certain metabolic functions. But when you tell people that there is formaldehyde in their food, it scares them.
The definition of a GMO is the million-dollar question, right?
If you put into Google, what is a GMO? The first few Google results are bullshit. They're not science-based, they're not reputable sources. They're going to be websites that are sponsored by the organic industry to scare you about your food.
Genetic engineering does not involve syringes with needles. It's just not how it works. I mean, it might be kind of like, people inject marinade into their turkey breast when they cook. That might be what you kind of get when you inject something into a tomato.
If you eat something that's genetic engineered, it doesn't mean it's going to genetically engineer you. That's, I think, one of the biggest myths, that once you get over that, then it seems a lot less scary.
GMO is not an ingredient. It's a process. Like, you don't have a bowl of GMOs. Like, it's not in a big bowl that the manufacturers are scooping and putting in there.
GMO is a term that has entered the public lexicon. It stands for genetically modified organism. And I find it to be a rather scientifically arbitrary term.
When scientists and lay people use the term GMO, we mean something very, very different.
So if I were to describe what a genetically modified organism is to a child, I'd say that it's any organism when scientists have modified purposefully its DNA. So be that through crossbreeding, through mutagenesis, through any method that exists. But in today's debate, the definition that is being used is when a scientist takes one or more genes from one species and purposefully adds it to another species, and that those two species don't mate.
But when scientists use it, we're talking about a much broader, scientists don't use that term. It's part of it. Scientists don't, I would never say, I made a GMO in lab when I modify a cell line.
I think most people understand that, pollen goes from a flower into another flower, and that the offspring will have a combination of traits from those both. And the thing is that that's random. We don't really have a lot of control over it. So, great example, disease resistance. So you could breed those plants with some other ones and hope that the random combinations get to be what you want. Or you can find that gene for disease resistance and use a technology to put it into the plant that you want, and you're done. It's amazing.
The vast majority of all the food we eat, with the exception of very few things like wild game, some wild herbs and mushrooms, have very much been modified genetically. And so unless you want to be a forager or a hunter-gatherer, even when you're eating organic food, it's been genetically enhanced.
I think that one problem we've had with biotechnology is that people can't touch it. You know, it's like, okay, there's this thing going on, but I see no benefit to me. Arctic apples and some of the other products on the horizon change all that. People don't like browned apples or apples with bruises. And so I find that I end up throwing away quite a bit of the produce that we buy because if it's not perfectly attractive, then people don't want to eat it. It's a fact of life. So with Arctic apples, you can cut it up for lunch and it doesn't brown. It's amazing.
In the developing world, there's this huge problem of vitamin A deficiency, which causes blindness, maternal mortality, and suffering and death. And so there is a rice, a GMO rice called golden rice, which is fortified with beta carotene, which is the precursor to vitamin A. Because of anti-GMO ideology and lobbying and overregulation, this rice has not reached the people who need it most. And this is tragic.
And that's where it doesn't become about us living in the United States in our comfy houses. It becomes about other people in distant lands that we may not know and are genuinely suffering from hunger. So I do not think that biotech crops are going to solve world hunger, but they can contribute significantly to helping.
The most brilliant marketing move of the last, I don't know what, it's been 10 years since the organic label came into existence, was to convince everyone that organic means pesticide-free. I mean, copper sulfate is really bad for the environment, and it's allowed in organic farming. It's used in both types of farming, but it's allowed in organic. So I think the marketing behind organic farming has really convinced people that organic is more environmentally friendly and doesn't use pesticides and is healthier. And the data does not support any of those claims.
There's no health benefits from eating an organic diet. There's nothing really to be gained.
It's just more expensive. It's just a more expensive diet if you choose a non-GMO diet.
How many people have gotten sick, died, gotten cancer, even gotten a cold or a cough as a result of eating quote unquote GMOs? And the answer is zero. There hasn't even been a sniffle associated with consuming an ingredient or product derived from a GMO.
A lot of the arguments against GM foods comes down to people alleging that there's a connection between the rise in cancers and the rise in autism and the rise in other diseases that coincides with the introduction of GM foods, except that there aren't actually rises in those things. So if you actually look at the cancer statistics, if you adjust them for the fact that we're all living longer and that fewer people are dying of cancer, overall cancer has been very constant. Autism has been very constant. Diagnosis has gone up because, 30 years ago, a diagnosis didn't even exist. It's not because more people had autism, we just didn't call it autism. So the entire basis of that argument is not even true because those things are not increasing.
There also doesn't need to be this dichotomy of everything has to be a GMO or everything has to be traditionally bred. Sometimes traditional breeding is good enough, but sometimes we need to resort to genetic modification, and there's no need to really distrust that.
When you come down to it, people aren't farmers because it's not like venture capital or something like that where you're just in it to make money. Like, they're there because they love it, because they love producing food. And so whether it's, the corn that goes into making corn syrup or, some heirloom tomato that you get at the farmer's market, it's love that's coming to you in food form.
There are too many too soon. There are dangerous chemicals in the vaccine. I prefer to fight off disease naturally. It's a big pharma conspiracy these diseases aren't actually that dangerous. These are all reasons that I've heard parents give, or bloggers or writers, for not vaccinating. And none of them are based in evidence or science. What we see is that when certain communities dip below a certain threshold of any certain vaccine, we start seeing outbreaks of these very vaccine-preventable diseases.
I think if most of us asked our grandparents who were alive before the polio vaccine, and you talk to them about vaccines, their perspective on vaccines is hugely different because they all knew someone who died of polio, who died of measles. This isn't vaccines, it's antibiotics, but it's similar. My great-grandparents had a child between my grandmother and her older sister who died of scarlet fever, which is strep throat. So do we really want to go back to a time when children die of strep throat? I don't.
It's weird that people are freaked out about something like GMOs or something that really isn't a risk. But then sometimes when there's an actual real thing we're trying to avoid, they're sort of, poo-pooing it. I feel like that's kind of a hard line for me. Like, I'm a lot more relaxed about organic produce. What am I going to do? Go pick it at Whole Foods? Like, I don't have that much time. If you want to shop at Whole Foods, go for it. But for vaccines, like, especially when I think about like my friends who are immunocompromised, could die if they're next to a kid who has some kind of, illness, it's really serious. So I take that stuff pretty seriously, but hopefully it's not, I don't have to start hopefully questioning people as they walk in my door. I think the common thread in a lot of these things is the idea that parents can just kind of cure something themselves, or cure their kids themselves. And I think maybe it's just a reaction to feeling really overwhelmed. It sort of leads to this idea of like, I don't need to vaccinate. I can just use essential oils, or I can use an organic diet that will cure my kids' food allergies, or homeopathic treatment for allergies, and all kinds of things that people think are gentler, or they can do it on their own, or homemade baby formula that end up being really, really dangerous. So I think it's that common thread of just like wanting to do everything yourself.
Can you just give a definition of homeopathy?
A serious one? Homeopathy is based on the idea that like cures like. So if you have this symptom, let's say you have gastrointestinal distress, the thing that will cure you is something that causes gastrointestinal distress. And that the way that it cures you is by diluting it so many times that you no longer have any of that original substance, but the water somehow remembers that it previously had this substance that causes your symptoms that you have in it. So basically everything that we know about chemistry and dilutions, everything that we know about physics, about how molecules work, because water doesn't have memory, and everything we know about pharmacology and toxicology would have to be wrong for homeopathy to work.
I can't imagine parents reaching for something that's untested, unregulated, and literally has no active ingredients in it. It just baffles me.
As embarrassing as it is, I tried it when I was first mom, because I genuinely didn't know. And then later on, I thought to myself, oh, that's why it didn't work.
Australia did a huge analysis of all the data about homeopathy and found, again, that homeopathy is no better than placebo. And that is the gold standard in medicine of whether a treatment works, is efficacious or not, whether it works. It has to be better than a placebo.
So I basically just gave him sugar water, which I could have made at home and saved myself a couple of bucks.
My co-founded organization, March Against Myths, we started very grassroots. I mean, it was 3 people who decided to start a movement. And when we went to our events, people would yell, "Who's paying you to be here? Who's funding you?" And the truth is, nobody's funding us. I've been called a fake mom. I have gotten death threats, read that my name is made up or fake, that maybe Monsanto came up with the very creative Coven Synopathy moniker. But no, that's really my name. It's on my birth certificate. That's what I've always been called.
I don't understand where the shill accusation comes from. I don't understand this mindset that anyone who doesn't have the exact same worldview as you must be paid to have that worldview. Like, it just makes no sense to me. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so this is going to be my armchair psychology thing here. It's really hard to have your worldview challenged. And so I think sometimes it's easier to think that people must be paid to disagree with you than to think that your worldview is incorrect. So maybe I do have an answer for where the shill accusation comes from. Maybe that's my answer.
No GMO! No GMO! No GMO! No GMO!
There was a food justice rally at the Capitol in DC, and it was a bunch of different groups: March Against Monsanto, Moms Across America, Occupy Monsanto. And so a few of us science advocates decided to have our own little wee counter protest.
Like, I got Dunkin' Donuts!
This woman comes over and says, you know, what illnesses do you represent? Which made no sense. But I thought she was trying to say, like, you don't know the position I'm in because my kids have been sick. And so I was just trying at first to kind of like let her know, well, I have a kid with a food allergy and it's a life-threatening food allergy. So I kind of know where you're coming from. But then I think she was just really horrified because in her mind, it was like, well, if your kid has a food allergy, why would you be feeding them, you know, GMOs? And so I wasn't even expecting to have like an interaction with somebody that day, but she said, I've cured.
Right.
And then just like, you're poisoning your kids, which made me go bananas.
I didn't insult you as a mother, ma'am, but that's good that you just went there. I just know what the evidence says. I'm just reading the studies. From scientific studies, from studies. Personal research is not science.
I'm usually like not angry about anything. I'm just like, oh, whatever. Like but I didn't expect to get that upset, but I did get really upset. So it was kind of a crazy experience.
I think for the average person who has questions about these issues, there's a ton of information out there on government websites like CDC and FDA. Scientific consensus exists for a reason, and scientific consensus is not like a vote that we took in a room where people raised hands. Like, that's not what consensus is. It's not a poll. It's the confluence of all the evidence coming together around one hypothesis.
I get a lot of these questions from my followers and my readers. People will say, is this safe for my child? Or they'll even send me some sort of symptoms they've been having or that their children have been having, and they'll ask me about it. And the first thing I say is, well, this is something you should ask your doctor. And please, please, I hope your doctor is not a naturopath or something like that. You know, go to a real doctor. Buy real medicine. Homeopathy is not real medicine.
So what all the evidence shows about what we should be eating, it's not about whether something's organic or how it's bred. It's that we need to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, less added sugar, you know, everything in moderation. It's not that complicated.
Just buy whatever's cheapest. That's what we do. Here in California, organic produce is sometimes cheaper than conventional produce, and I just buy that. And I treat them both exactly the same way. I wash them both under cold running water as recommended, and then my son eats 2 pounds of blueberries.
There's some organizations that are trying to scare people away from buying certain fruits and vegetables. That's crazy to me.
Part of it is like this panic over like, I have to do it one right way. And I was definitely like that with my son. I completely, you know, over-researched and freaked out about everything. And in a way, I was more relaxed with my daughter, and a lot of their outcomes turned out to be the same. Like when they started sleeping through the night was the same, even though it was like one way with one and, you know, one way with the other. And there's just only so much you can do. So you may as well just enjoy being a parent and not, other than like the basic safety stuff, which you can fit on a half a page, like you do not need to be freaking out about when you introduce solids or whether they do baby-led weaning or not, or I mean, when your kids are 10, 12, no one's talking about whether they were breastfed on the playground or on the, you know, when you pick them up from school, like you don't get to like carry the medal with you throughout parenthood. So just don't worry about it, you know?
The effects of stress on us and our children is way worse than anything that we're worrying about here. I can go crazy trying to avoid exposures to something in some product. But would I be having more benefit to my child by spending that time reading them a book?
I think people should try to find what the real issue is. You know, if your concern is over patent corporate control of our political system, that's an incredibly valid concern, and I share that concern. But GMOs aren't the cause of that, and banning GMOs isn't going to be the solution to that either. I encourage people to really focus on the real source of their anger rather than blaming a proxy.
There's a lot of these like fear-based communities, you know, that kind of bring people in. But so I feel like we're sort of creating a new community